Oh, YouTube. If you're epileptic, maybe don't look at these slides today. There's a bit of a flash here that you'll notice. I don't want to trigger anybody, so be forewarned. Welcome to Chadev, everybody. Welcome to Chadev. Round of applause for yourselves. Yeah. You made it. Warm the room up. All right. So, dongles, man, dongles. What a thing. What a wonder of modern technology. Yeah. Nah, we're going with it. We're fully committed now. There's no turning back. No way. No. So anyway, Joe, want to make an announcement? Round of applause for Joe.
A quick shout out to 2 meetups. One is starting in June. It's iOS apps. You can find it on meetup.com/iOS apps. What we're going to do is we're going to do the book. We're going to get the Big Nerd Ranch book and go through that. John Cotton and I are coordinating that for June to try to find a good time for that around the other meetups. Also tonight, 6 p.m. here on the 5th floor will be Floss Meetup. We're going to go over I've called it Pixolidator. You'll find it on our meetup site, meetup.com/floss-cha. And what that is if you have pictures on hard drives and CDs and start an open source project to get all those together. So tonight here, 6 p.m., 5th floor, and then watch for the iOS apps meetup for June, start of June.
Joe. All right. So, yeah, why not? Why not? Like that. That was a good one. All right. So, without further ado, everybody give a warm round of applause for J.D. Bell. He works at Squid, and he's going to talk to us about this today, The Beginner's Guide to Asking Help. Round of applause. Round of applause. There we go.
And since we're all, well, that's too loud. Okay, since we're all in the mood for giving a round of applause, I'd also like to give a round of applause to the Chadev team and Brett in particular for putting this together. It's a lot of work to organize and get presenters who don't respond to emails to actually show up for events. So thank you, Brett and Chadev team, for all you do. I am J.D. Bell. I work at Squid. In case you've never heard of Squid, welcome to Chattanooga. I hope you enjoy your stay here. For those of you who live here, you probably have heard of Squid. I am giving a presentation today on asking for help. If I can get this to respond. There we go. Okay. I'm a professional programmer. I have been paid to program for over 15 years now. I have a 4-year degree. You would think that I know what I'm doing, but the truth is none of us do. None of us are God. We do not know everything, so we must ask for help. And asking for help is a very scary thing to do. I am scared to ask for help. And there's a lot of reasons to be scared to ask for help. If you are not scared of asking for help, you probably should be. Fear is actually a very good thing. It keeps us alive. This is a picture of my son at the High Point Rock Climbing Gym. I like to go bouldering. Fear is what keeps me from falling off the wall. It signals that there's something possibly dangerous here. So I'm going to go over all of my personal fears asking for help and legitimize them. It's okay to be scared. Start off with, programmers hate distractions. This is my personal #1 biggest fear in asking another programmer for help. I have to interrupt their thought process. Gone, all of their short-term memory with all of its valuable context sucked into a black hole. They get mad at me. I get fearful because I don't like confrontation and I know they're going to yell at me. This is a legitimate reason to be afraid. It gives me anxiety. Keeps me up at night and at my desk. I'm also scared because I feel like I should know this stuff. It's my job to know this stuff. When I have to ask someone else for help, it means that I don't know everything that I'm supposed to know to do my job. I already feel like an imposter. I earn a pretty high salary relative to everyone else. I am praised for how much I can accomplish. I'm sure a lot of you, even if you don't earn a lot of money, you're the local wizard. You know how to do stuff. People look up to you to accomplish the things that they can't do for themselves. And so when you don't know something, it's a very scary situation. Maybe you'll be replaced. Maybe they'll find out your big secret that you're not actually as smart as you'd like everyone to think you are. This is a scary position to be in. I'll start an impromptu code review. I don't know if you guys have ever been through this. I'm through it all the time. Usually when I am asking for help, I am in the middle of doing something complicated and messy, and I'm having to make decisions about taking a particular route against all other routes, and there are opinions on this. So when I have to show someone my code, they're going to look at it and say, I could answer your question, but instead let me tell you everything you are currently doing wrong, and let's re-engineer this together right now. This is a scary position to get into. It's emotionally exhausting to have all of your work torn down in front of you. It's just easier not to ask a question. Just skip it, and I'll struggle on for a couple weeks and make excuses about how complicated it is. What do we do with that fear? There's all these reasons. I'm sure there are more. I'm sure each of you has had some experience in the past about asking for help. Maybe you've gone on Stack Overflow and gotten one of those like -30 question posts, and it's like, I can't handle the internet violence anymore. I have to flee. All of these things make you not want to ask questions. And so what you can do is you can hide under your desk or at home and not ask questions anymore and never get work accomplished. Or you can take all that fear, all those signals about those dangerous places you could end up in, and prepare yourself. When you go out into the wilderness of other people's opinions and ideas and all that valuable stuff out there, take some supplies with you. Be ready to handle these different, potentially difficult scenarios. What follows is my personal advice and experience. I'm sure everyone will have their own bits that they would love to see added to these slides. I don't have time, and I'm presenting, so you have to go through mine. But what I want to start by encouraging you to do is, part of that preparation is doing something before you ask a specific question. If you have a specific problem or error or something you're trying to accomplish and you don't know, give yourself a little prep time for that one particular issue. Particularly if you're going to ask on Stack Overflow, because they are not kind at all. They will totally rip your question up. Start by verifying your assumptions. This is a big one that I typically forget to do. I'm getting better at it as the years go by because it works for me so often. This is usually where the issue, the error is coming from. That argument that I'm passing in isn't the value I thought it was. I thought I was passing a number in. It was a string because JavaScript don't care. And so everything bombs. And I'm like, I passed in the right number. Is it a range issue? Maybe the API is broken. I know the browser is the issue. Check your assumptions first. Verify that your code paths are actually being reached. I had this issue yesterday. Me and a colleague were working on a particular section of code. We kept making changes. Nothing was happening. The error was still there. We're like starting to pull out our hair, and I don't have a lot to lose to begin with, which is why I wear a hat. So what we finally did was just set a breakpoint, and guess what? That code path was completely being skipped because of an if clause about 10 lines up, which was jumping down to the second half of the function. Oh, okay, 10 minutes down the drain because we just made an assumption that, of course, our code was getting hit. So that's a good one to do. If you're not working in a browser, console log, print line. Those are very common ones. Don't jump to the most complicated scenario of it's an operating system error. Just add in some basic logging for yourself and check your assumptions. And also review that API documentation. I cannot tell you the number of times I have called a function with this delicious name that's going to tells me in the API function name that it's going to return all this wonderful data, and it doesn't. And I think it's an error on my side. And then I look at the documentation, and it turns out they just picked a really crappy name for that function. So check that API documentation. Make sure it's doing what you assume it's doing. It's all very helpful stuff for me in the past. Talk to a duck. Yes, a duck, a rubber duck. This is very helpful stuff to do too. This is a tool that I learned in college. One of my professors who worked at IBM had this wonderful story about I think he called it the $1 million semicolon. So he had an error with his code not compiling correctly, and he couldn't figure it out. So he brought in one colleague after another. They were walking by, kept stopping in, because if you see a little crowd, you want to join the crowd, so it kept growing. Before long, he had 5 or 6 engineers at IBM, all earning crazy amounts of money. And after working through it for like half an hour, he finally realized he was missing a semicolon on one of his lines, and his compiler wasn't giving him a great error message that pointed that out for him. And someone, when they noticed it, gave him a little swat on the head, and they all walked away. What he told us, and he calculated it out afterwards and figured that he probably cost IBM about $1 million on that semicolon. What he told us was if he had just talked to a rubber duck about it and told the rubber duck about what he had tried so far, he would have realized that he was missing the semicolon. And this is a technique I use pretty frequently. It's really, really helpful to describe the problem to an inanimate object. Among other things, rubber duckies don't judge. They don't start code reviews. They have no opinions about whether you're an imposter or not. This is great. They'll totally be your buddy and your friend. They also don't mind distractions. What answer do you want? This is a good one to think about. Even if you don't know the details of the answer, you probably know the general shape of the answer. If I'm struggling on a math problem and I ask someone for help, like what is the answer here, and they tell me the answer is purple, I think that's the wrong answer. I don't have to be an expert to know that the answer to a math problem is not purple, most of the time. So if you spend a little bit of time thinking about what kind of answer you're looking for, think about your ideal result. You may be asking about this particular function and calling with these arguments, and you're expecting a certain result back, but what's the end result you're looking for? How will you know that this answer that you've received from a colleague is the right one to solve your problem? Is it just that you stop getting an error, or is it that the program now behaves a certain way? I have numerous times, and again, I have a recent example with ES6 modules, which I'll get into a little later, but it helps to know what the end result is. It also helps to know what your key metrics are. It's not uncommon as a software engineer to get lots of different answers and lots of different ones you can use. If you know what you care about most, performance, maintainability, cost, some other metric, it helps you sort through which answer is going to be the most viable. And if you give that information up front, it helps the people who are offering up answers give you better answers tuned to what you want. I see this advice all the time on Stack Overflow. I'm pretty active on Stack Overflow, and oftentimes the questions are just missing these basic elements. Finally, are you open to alternatives? If I am asking for help figuring out how to tow my camper trailer with my sedan, and my sedan doesn't have shock absorbers or a hitch installed, there are a couple different answers I could get to that problem. One is get yourself a truck so you can actually haul your stuff around, and that may be a totally viable alternative that I hadn't considered. But if I already know the truck isn't going to work for me for reasons X, Y, Z, tell me up front. Say, I know I could use a truck, but I have to use this sedan. And then we can get into, well, this is the kind of shock absorbers you need, this is the kind of hitch you need to install, and so forth. So just being really upfront by what kind of answer are you looking for can really help to speed up the process of getting those answers. I cannot tell you how valuable an MCVE is. If this term is new to you, you probably haven't spent a lot of time on Stack Overflow, or at least asking on Stack Overflow. People ask for this all the time. An MCVE is a minimal, complete, and verifiable example. And this is where I get into those ES6 modules. I was dealing with a really complicated situation with an ES6 module and how it was compiling, and I spent a good 2 hours trying to describe to a colleague what I was looking for, what I wanted the end result to be, why the solutions he was trying to offer me weren't going to work for what I was trying to accomplish. And we got nowhere. We both just got really angry at each other because I thought he wasn't listening to me and he thought I was being stupid, which is not an unreasonable assumption to make usually. But in this case, I knew what he was offering me wasn't right. The next day after we'd both cooled off a little bit, I sat down and took 20 minutes to create an MCVE. Just a simple little project on my computer, 3 files, less than 20 lines total, and I sent it to him. And I said, here is what I'm trying to accomplish. How can I do this? And he spent 10 minutes looking at it. He's like, oh, I get it now. I see. I can play with this thing and understand the problem you're trying to solve. So MCVEs are extremely helpful to put together. I highly recommend you take the time. It's worth it. It's an investment. And it's not uncommon, too, as you're building an MCVE, to see the problem for yourself and figure it out without having to ask. Prep your environment. If you're going to call someone over to your desk to work on an issue that you're having with your code, it's really helpful if you go ahead and pull up the code files, if you spin up your server or your program, if you set your breakpoints ahead of time, open up the tabs in your browser, or if it's a desktop application, get it running so that you can actually see it all running. Because most likely the person that you're asking help from isn't a true, legitimate genius. Occasionally they are. We have one in my company that makes me feel very insecure. But we need to help each other kind of gain the context that we already have. So if I'm asking a colleague for help, I need to kind of remind him, give him a little tour of the logic that I'm trying to understand and get him up to speed so that he can actually answer my question, or she. Finally, notes. I have one colleague who has made a regular practice of taking notes as she works. She'll work through a particular project, and as she goes, she'll record all of the questions she's got. And then when I come over to help her, she's got something to refer to. So she doesn't have to remember, like, I know I was having an issue in this area of the code, but I can't quite remember what it is, so while you're standing here, let me play with it for 5 minutes. We can skip all that, and she can just tell me right off the bat what the issue is and why my genius solution isn't going to solve the problem, because she can remember all those details. I think this is a great idea. I'm going to start borrowing it too. Plan your question. And specifically, and this has to do with maintaining long-term relationships. How and when are you going to ask your question? This is really helpful for teams especially, because if you make a regular practice of running into a problem, jumping up from your computer and running over to your colleague's desk, you're not going to have a very happy team for a long time. So start off by having a conversation before you even have a question. Hey, when I do have a question, when's the best time for me to talk to you about this? Is it when you arrive first thing in the morning? Is it just before you leave and you need to go pick up your kids from school or something? Is it lunchtime? Is that a good time to come to you? Or are you kind of like wanting to disconnect during lunch? Meeting invites are great. Not everyone loves meeting invites. I know personally, one thing I've learned to do for my teammates is I will set up office hours on my calendar using a Google Calendar feature where they can book that time without even having to have me accept it. And this gives them the ability to see on my calendar when I've specifically blocked off time for them. I've told them, this is your time, come distract me. All during office hours, it's fine. The rest of my calendar is my time when I need to stay focused and do my work. And they generally understand that and respect that. We also implemented a policy in the engineering team at Squid on Zen time. Department-wide, everyone understands that the first 50 minutes of every hour is focus time. It's Zen time. It's not a good time for distraction. The last 10 minutes, open season. It's distraction time. Jump up from your desk, go interrupt people. We all understand this is distraction time. You are fine to come interrupt me. And this has worked really well for us. It won't work for every team, but if you can deploy these kinds of different things within your department and particularly observe them, it can really help to mitigate issues with distraction and all of the angst that comes with it. Rotate. Don't pick a favorite engineer and always bug them with every single question. Try to find other experts in your area and rotate around. Ask different people. Not only will this take all the burden off that one engineer, you will get so much benefit from that diversity of thought and approach. Even if you're talking to someone who you think probably won't have a good idea, I've been surprised how many times, like, that's an excellent idea. Why didn't I talk to you sooner? I thought you were an idiot. So rotate through those engineers in your office or whatever setting you may find yourself in. And I mentioned on the last slide, my colleague who bundles her questions together. It's really helpful because we don't have all that overhead time of like, oh, it's 45 minutes before a meeting, so I can't start anything, and oh, now I have to reestablish context 30 minutes after the meeting, so every 30-minute meeting actually costs an hour and 15 minutes, all that stuff. I'll get that later. She can ask me 4 or 5 questions at the same time without all that overhead cost. Okay, so those are all good ideas for prepping for asking a particular question or asking for questions in general. I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about what a great question looks like. This is very opinion-oriented. This is kind of what I found to be a good question. A lot of this stems from my experience on Stack Overflow, which has like a really, really rigorous idea of what a question looks like. So these aren't going to apply in every scenario, obviously, but I think they're helpful to look to think through. They're what I think through when I'm about to ask a question. First of all, this is a great example of a bad question. This is not a question. This is a request. This is someone saying, hey, I've just run into a new technology. It's really complicated. I feel insecure. I'm going to ask a question, which is essentially me saying, hey, build it for me, and I will watch you build it for me, and then I'll know everything I need to know, and I can run along and take credit for all of the hard work that you've put in. This is the kind of question you want to avoid asking. It's very tempting to ask these questions when you're working with a brand new technology. When I started programming, JavaScript was something that you put in script tags, and its sole purpose was to talk to the server and make the server do everything. I worked in IE6. We occasionally used Firefox because it had Firebug, and that was really cool, but everything was IE6. Then I took a break from web development for a little while, did desktop development at Blue Cross. Then I came back, and I was like, oh my gosh, what did you all do to JavaScript? There's grunt, whatever that is. There's these Docker container things. I have no idea what you're talking about. There's like I knew what jQuery was. I didn't have a lot of experience, but now there's like Angular and React, and why are you making the poor browser do all this work? It was very confusing, and so I wanted to just go to my colleagues and say, just show me everything. But that's too big a question, isn't it? Like, no one can answer that question because it's too particular. So I had to challenge myself to ask specific questions. Don't ask big, general, sweeping questions that try to encompass everything known to man. I push myself to ask questions that are specific in nature. How does this particular function interact with the rest of it? When I take that approach, I push myself to read the documentation more. I push myself to experiment and try things more. And I find that not only do I get better answers, but I learn more in the effort of trying to ask those more specific questions. It forces me to dive in and get more hands-on. I also try to ask more why questions and less how questions. Sometimes you have to ask a how question because it's just not obvious, but most of the time, how is already answered by the code base or the documentation. How is actually the easy side of the equation. Why is a way more interesting question. If you're working with Angular and you're like, well, how does the variables, like how do these attributes work to get the data into the screen? You can read the documentation for that. Why does Angular work that way is a really interesting question. You can actually start to have a conversation about the separation of concerns and the ideas of views. These give you a much broader perspective on the problem scope and help you to answer the specifics more intuitively. It's like, okay, I can kind of understand what the developer was thinking when they created this system. Suddenly, the particulars and the hows make more sense. They connect together. I can understand them better. Ask answerable questions. This one's mostly just for me to remember not to ask questions that are actually just rants, like, why is this so stupid? That's not an answerable question. Answerable questions are relatively small in scope. They have a technical answer. They can, I mean, I don't want to get too far into this one in particular. There's tons of stuff on Stack Overflow in their meta if you want to read about answerable questions. But I find this one to be a helpful one to keep in mind when I'm feeling stressed out and emotional and I just want to berate this stupid new technology. Grunt. I actually like grunt. Engage with the answerer. This one is really helpful for both the person asking the question and the person answering the question. And this is one that I feel pretty strong about because when you don't engage, it leaves you as the questioner passively receiving information that's going to go in one ear and out the other, as they say. You're going to be hearing, but you're going to get stuck on something, some technical detail that the answerer was saying in passing, and you're going to remain stuck there. And they're going to plow on ahead, and you're just going to keep nodding because you don't want to interrupt them, but you're lost. You're gone. You're not going to remember any of it. It's also frustrating for the answerer because I know when I'm answering a question and I'm just kind of getting a passive nod and like, okay, like I don't know if they're actually truly understanding and receiving what I'm trying to say. And I want to help. That's why I'm there. I'm answering the question. And so I find myself repeating things over and over again, trying to explain them in 10 different ways because I'm looking for that sparkle in their eye, like, oh, I got it. So if you engage by saying, oh, what you're describing is kind of like this other thing I know, or at least trying to repeat back what you just heard, all of that is really helpful for engaging. It drills it further into your own mind so that you actually retain that information, and it helps keep the conversation moving forward. The answerer can keep pace with where you're at and keep the conversation moving forward rather than just looping, trying to make sure that you actually understood that thing. So that's pretty much it. I've got my before you ask, I've got asking a great question, verify your assumptions, what answer do you want, MCVE, prep your environment, talk to a duck, asking great questions they're typically specific, focus more on like the why, less on the how, although don't try that on Stack Overflow, they'll hate you. Answerable questions, engage with the answer when you can. These are things I have found helpful in asking questions and sometimes in answering questions. Even if you don't find they all apply to you, it's helpful to think through that process and reflect on your fears and your frustrations and how you can improve those relationships and those experiences. I have time for Q&A, yes?
We have time.
Okay, so if you have questions, apparently raise your hand and he'll give you a microphone.
Yep. Anybody?
Okay. Specific, answerable, why, not how.
How do I make the sky purple?
I'm sorry?
How do I make the sky purple?
I think purple glasses would actually work really well. There you go.
Great answer. Another one? Russ?
How long should a person struggle with a problem before asking for help?
That is a very good question. You should struggle with the problem until you reach a point where you can't make any forward progress. That's the metric I use for myself. Usually you can learn another thing. So my goal, I look at it as like approaching a cliff face, and I'm at the bottom, and I've got this problem, and I need to get to the top. And if I just stare at the top, it's kind of overwhelming to think about getting up there. But I look for a handhold right where I'm standing at eye level, and I look for another handhold. Can I learn one more thing about this technology? Can I learn about another property, another function? When I'm out, when I've run out of things to learn, and I've actually reached a place where I don't know where to go next, then I ask a question. Or if I see 2 or 3 equally viable paths and I cannot figure out a good way of choosing between them, that's a great time to seek the advice of another engineer who may have more experience in the area. I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all answer, but if you make an effort to go with those 2 things, I have personally found that it's better for me, and it's better for the team. What do you think? I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy who doesn't know everything, so.
No question this time. What do you do even if you follow all this and no one can find someone with the exact same problem on a forum and they come back, never mind, I fixed it. How they fixed it.
So the first part was, what do you do if no one else knows the answer? Crash. That's usually what I do. I just start trying crazy things until something works. And if you come across a post where someone asked a question, I think that's the second part. You ask a question, or they asked a question and then answered, never mind, I figured it out. I usually just cry and sometimes punch my keyboard a couple times.
JD, sorry for talking over you there. I thought you were.
That's
were
fine.
done.
I don't think the microphone was working for a sec.
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
On Stack Overflow, somebody was asking a question about how to correctly evaluate a string representation of a Ruby hash so that they could use it as a hash again, but it was a string. And I felt like they were asking the wrong question. And like there's no real safe, secure way to do that. And so my answer to their unanswerable question was to ask a different question, and that is, if possible, store that original hash as JSON, and then parse your JSON, and then you're not going to introduce security risks into your code. So anyhow, if you can't find an answer to your question, maybe it's the wrong question, and maybe there's a different problem that you need to solve instead. So that's my experience.
Yeah, no, that is good advice.
Time for one more.
Unless you're asking a question about how to install .NET 1.1 on Windows NT 4.0, and then sorry.
So you didn't necessarily talk about this specifically, but I assume that learning, another way to learn to ask a question would be to try to answer questions. Do you at Squid, or do you think it'd be a good idea to maybe plug in some time in your day to say, hey, I'm going to spend 30 minutes just going through Stack Overflow and seeing if I can answer questions? Do you think that's worthwhile? Or, I mean, it's always worthwhile to try and contribute, but as far as like trying to learn how to answer questions and ask questions, do you think that's valuable?
Yeah, no, that's really good. They say there's no better way to learn something than to try to teach it. I do that personally. Like lately, we've been playing around with Webpack and ES6 modules. So I went to Stack Overflow, added that to my list of questions that I want to answer, even though I know barely anything about it, and started looking for really simple questions I could answer, because oftentimes contained within the question is an interesting thing I didn't know, which I go research it, read the documentation, find out more about it, think about the problem for a while, it's related to something else I've done before, and then come back with a suggestion, and if it was helpful, great, I've learned something. If it wasn't helpful, then I'd delete the answer and get my rep back. So.
All right, everybody get over for JD. Appreciate it. Thanks for bearing with us. We will be back next week. We'll see everybody then. Bye-bye.